He loved her enough to walk away from an empire. She loved him enough to let him think she didn't. 13 years of silence, 13 years of lies, and the truth that finally surfaces will not just break one man's heart, it will burn his entire world to the ground. If you've been waiting for a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and the kind of love that refuses to die no matter how many times it's buried, this one is for you. Watch until the very last second, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The nursing home smelled like disinfectant and old wood, and something underneath both of those things that Damien had never been able to name. Something slow and irreversible, like time itself had settled into the walls and was quietly rotting there. He came every third Sunday. He came alone, without security, without the black SUVs that trailed him everywhere else. He parked 2 blocks east and walked, hands in his coat pockets, collar up against the November wind. Just another man in an expensive jacket moving through a neighborhood that had seen better decades. He was 37 years old, and he ran the most feared criminal organization on the eastern seaboard, and none of that meant anything the moment he stepped through those double doors and smelled that smell. The woman at the front desk knew him as Mr. Daniel Voss. She smiled at him with practiced warmth and told him his mother was having a quiet morning, which was the best he could hope for. He signed the visitor log with a false name he had used for 4 years and walked down the corridor without looking at the other residents in their chairs, their slack mouths and unfocused eyes, because looking at them meant thinking about Margaret, and thinking about Margaret meant feeling something he had spent a long time learning not to feel. Room 14 was at the end of the east wing. The door was slightly open, which was unusual. He could hear a voice before he reached it, low and even, the kind of voice that doesn't perform patience, just has it. He stopped outside the door. So after she told him that, he didn't speak to her for 3 days. Can you imagine? 3 whole days. A pause, and then the sound of something, a brush maybe, moving through hair. I think he was embarrassed more than anything. Men get like that when they know they were wrong. They need time to build a story that makes them the reasonable one. His mother's voice came back, thin but alert, in that way it sometimes was in the mornings before the fog rolled in. Damien was like that, stubborn like a wall. Was he? Wouldn't admit when he was wrong about anything, but he always knew. You could see it in his face. He'd get this, she paused, searching, this tight look around his eyes. That sounds like someone who felt things very deeply and didn't know what to do with it. He was a good boy. Margaret's voice softened. Before everything, he was a good boy. Damien stood in the corridor with his hand braced against the wall and breathed. Then he pushed the door open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed beside his mother, a hairbrush in her hand, Margaret's white hair half finished. She was wearing pale blue scrubs. Her hair was pulled back. There were shadows under her eyes that suggested she had been working too long or sleeping too little or both. She looked up when he entered, and for one single second neither of them moved. Elena Rowan. He had not seen her face in 13 years. He had tried, in those first raw months, to forget it, had convinced himself he had succeeded. Looking at her now, he understood that he had not forgotten a single thing, not the particular dark brown of her eyes, not the way her jaw set when she was bracing for impact, not the small scar at the corner of her left eyebrow she'd gotten falling off a bicycle at 12 years old, which she had told him about once, laughing, and which he had kissed without thinking anything of it at the time. She stood up from the bed in one controlled motion. "Mr. Voss," she said. Her voice was completely level. His mother turned toward the door, and her face arranged itself into the particular kind of uncertain pleasure that meant she recognized him as someone she was supposed to know without being able to attach a name. "Oh," Margaret said, "you came." He crossed the room and kissed her cheek and said, "I came, Mom," in the same voice he always used here, which was nothing like any other voice he used anywhere else. Then he straightened and looked at Elena across his mother's head. "I wasn't aware there was a new staff member," he said. "I've been here for 4 years," Elena said. The number landed somewhere in his chest. He kept his expression neutral with the ease of a man who had spent 2 decades controlling rooms full of people who would have killed him if they'd sensed weakness. "I'd like a word," he said, "when you have a moment." "I have patience," she said. "When you have a moment," he repeated, and something in his tone closed the conversation. She looked at him steadily for 3 seconds, long enough to make clear she wasn't intimidated, then said to Margaret, "I'll be right back to finish your hair, Mrs. Vescari," and set the brush on the bedside table with the particular care of someone who was making sure their hands didn't shake. He followed her into the corridor. She walked to the end of it, to a narrow window that looked out over a brown November garden, and then she turned and faced him with her arms crossed and her chin level. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "Excuse me?" "This is my shift. You can speak to the director if you have concerns about patient care." He looked at her. He looked at the way she was holding herself, controlled, deliberate, the posture of someone who had been expecting this moment and had rehearsed for it, and was still not entirely sure the rehearsal was enough. "You've been taking care of my mother for 4 years, he said. "I take care of a lot of patients." "You knew who she was. Her name is on her chart." "Elena." The name in his mouth after 13 years. It sat differently than he expected. Not like a weapon and not like a wound, more like something he had been carrying wrong, in the wrong hand all this time. She looked at him. Something moved through her face and was controlled before it could become anything identifiable. "I have to get back," she said. "You're not going anywhere." "Excuse me?" The edge in her voice matched his now. "You don't get to tell me." "I have questions," he said. "You're going to answer them." "I don't owe you anything." "No," he agreed. "You don't. You made that very clear 13 years ago." The silence between them was the kind that accumulates, not empty, full, packed with everything neither of them was saying. Her jaw was tight. He could see the pulse in her throat, and he hated that he noticed it. "I'm going to finish my shift," she said finally, "and then I'm going to speak to the director about reassignment. I think that's the cleanest solution for everyone." "For you," he said. "You mean for you?" She didn't answer. "You've been paying her bills," he said. Elena went very still. He had learned it 2 hours ago, going through Margaret's financial records on his way here. Records he had never reviewed personally because he transferred funds monthly through a proxy account and assumed it was handled. What the proxy account showed when he finally looked was a consistent gap. Someone had been covering shortfalls for years, small amounts individually, significant in aggregate. The payments traced back to a private account under a name he didn't recognize, and then, an hour of work later, to a nursing license registered in that same name at this address. "That's not your concern," Elena said. "She has a son," he said. "She has a son who provides for her. Why are you paying anything?" There were months when the funds didn't come through, transition periods, administrative delays. She said it like she was reading from a form. "I made sure there was no gap in her care. With your own money, it wasn't a lot. It was $18,000 over 3 years. He watched her face. "Which, on a nurse's salary, is not nothing." Elena looked away from him, out toward the brown garden, and he watched the line of her throat move as she swallowed. "She's a good woman," she said, and her voice was quieter now, something in it that he couldn't quite harden himself against. "She talks about you, you know. Even when she doesn't know who I am, or where she is, she talks about you. She says you were a good boy before everything went wrong." She paused. "I just made sure she was comfortable." "Why?" She looked back at him. "Because she deserved it." "Why did you care what she deserved?" "Damien, why?" His voice was still controlled, still even, but the word came out with more weight than he intended. "You walked away from both of us. You made a choice. So why did you spend 13 years taking care of a woman you had no obligation to?" "I have to go." She stepped past him. He caught her arm. Not hard, just a hand around her wrist. And she stopped. He could feel her pulse under his fingers, fast. Whatever she was showing on her face, her pulse was running. "Let go of me," she said quietly. He did. He let go and stepped back and put his hands in his pockets and looked at her. "I'm not done," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't look back at him as she walked down the corridor. That's what I'm afraid of. He sat with his mother for 90 minutes. Margaret drifted in and out, talking sometimes to him, and sometimes to people who weren't there, calling him by his father's name twice, calling him by no name at all, and simply patting his hand with her thin fingers as if he were a child who needed calming. He let her. He sat in the chair beside her bed while November pressed gray against the window and listened to her talk about a garden she had kept 30 years ago, roses that didn't survive the cold, a dog whose name she remembered when she could not remember her son's. When she fell asleep, he sat for another 20 minutes and then stood and walked out. Elena was at the nurse's station. She saw him coming and kept her eyes on the chart in front of her, but her shoulders shifted, a small, involuntary thing. He stopped at the desk. "I'll be back Sunday," he said. "I'll make sure someone else is assigned." "That's not necessary." "I think it is." "Elena." He waited until she looked up. "Whatever you're running from, I'm going to find out. You know that." She held his gaze. There was something in her eyes that he couldn't read, something layered, exhausted, and very old, like it had been there for years and was so accustomed to its own weight it no longer registered as pain. "Some things are better left alone," she said. "Not for me." She looked back down at the chart. "I know that too," she said. He left. Marcus Tyrell was waiting outside on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket, head bare in the cold, looking like exactly what he was, a man whose job was to be dangerous and patient in equal measure. He had been with Damien for 9 years and was one of perhaps 4 people in the world Damien trusted past a certain threshold, which was not the same as trusting completely, because Damien did not trust anyone completely, including himself. "How is she?" Marcus asked. "Same." Damien didn't break stride. "I need something." "Name it." "Employee file. Westbrook Care Facility, East Wing. Nurse." He paused. "Elena Rowan, or whatever name she's using." Marcus didn't ask questions. This was one of the reasons Damien kept him close. "Timeline?" "Tonight." They reached the car. Damien stopped with his hand on the door and looked back at the nursing home, at its ordinary beige facade and the potted plants someone had put by the entrance that were dying slowly in the cold. 4 years. She had been 40 minutes from his office for 4 years. The thought moved through him like something wrong. "There's a conference call at 7, Marcus said. "Push it." "Bertolini's already... Push it." He got in the car. The file arrived at 9:15. Damien was at the desk in his apartment, jacket off, a glass of water untouched at his elbow, when his encrypted tablet lit up with the documents Marcus had pulled. He opened them without urgency, or with the appearance of none, which he had learned was the same thing if you held it long enough. Elena Rowan, licensed practical nurse, certificate issued 11 years ago. Prior to that, no employment record, no credit history before 11 years ago, no address history before 11 years ago. It was the kind of gap that people who had been trained to look for gaps noticed immediately. 11 years ago, she had materialized fully formed, new name, new documentation, new history, and built a life inside it with the careful patience of someone who knew the life before it could not follow her. She had a small apartment on the other side of the city. She drove a 6-year-old car. She had no debt except a modest balance on a single credit card she paid down monthly. She had no visible social connections outside of work. She did not appear in photographs online. She had made herself disappear and then done it again, inside her own disappearance, layer after layer of nothing to find. Damien turned the tablet face down on the desk and sat back. He had been running intelligence networks for a decade and a half. He understood what it looked like when someone was hiding from a specific threat rather than hiding out of general preference. Everything about Elena's paper trail had the shape of protection, not privacy. She hadn't simply changed her name and moved on. She had constructed a new identity with the precision of someone who was afraid. Of what? Of whom? The glass of water sat at his elbow. He didn't touch it. He thought about his mother's voice saying he was a good boy before everything. He thought about Elena's face in the corridor, the held-in quality of her, the way she had moved past him like she was navigating around something sharp. He thought about $18,000, 3 years, A woman who owed his family nothing and had shown up anyway and paid and kept quiet and kept her face turned away from the door every third Sunday. She had known he was coming. She had positioned herself in his mother's room where she would hear his footsteps in time to prepare. She had kept a wall up not like someone who didn't care, but like someone who cared too much and had been managing it long enough to be very good at it. He picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't used in 2 years. It rang 4 times before a voice came on. "It's late," the voice said. "I need you to pull archived records," Damien said. 13 years back. Any correspondence, any transaction, anything touching my family around that period that didn't go through standard channels." A pause. "That's a big ask." "I know. What am I looking for?" Damien looked at the blank screen of his tablet. "A threat," he said. "Someone delivered a threat 13 years ago, to someone outside the family. I need to find what it said and who sent it." Another pause, longer. "Damien, if this connects upward, it connects wherever it connects," he said. "Find it." He ended the call and sat in the quiet apartment with the city pressing its light against the windows and thought about a girl at 22 climbing into a black car outside a parking garage, not looking back. He had told himself for 13 years that she hadn't looked back because she didn't care. It was the story that had made the anger possible, and the anger had made everything else possible, and he had built an entire version of himself on top of that story. He was beginning to understand that the foundation might not hold. His phone buzzed. Marcus. A text. Silas called, asking about your Sunday schedule. 3rd time this month. Damien read it twice. His Uncle Silas had been asking about his Sunday schedule. His Uncle Silas, who managed the organization's financial architecture and had access to accounts and records going back to Damien's father's time. His Uncle Silas, who had stepped in after his father's death to guide a 22-year-old through the first brutal years of running an empire. His Uncle Silas, who had always had an explanation for everything and had always been standing close enough to whisper it. Damien set the phone down. The quiet of the apartment pressed in around him. Outside, the city moved through its night with no awareness of the specific gravity of this moment. The moment when a man who had spent 13 years building on a lie sat in a chair in the dark and felt the first stone shift. He picked up his tablet again. Found the file. Found the photograph Marcus had pulled from the nursing home's internal records. Employee ID, taken about 2 years ago. Elena, slightly younger than he'd seen her today, looking directly at the camera with the expression of someone who had agreed to be photographed and was getting it over with. Not smiling, not performing, just looking. He had been so certain for so long that what he'd seen in that parking garage was everything there was to see. The car, the man, the not looking back. A clean story. An ending. But she had been here, taking care of his mother, paying for it with money she didn't have to spare, knowing he would come through those doors eventually and choosing not to run, or not running fast enough, which was almost the same thing. His phone buzzed again, a different number. The contact he'd called 6 minutes ago. He answered. "You're not going to like this," the voice said. "Tell me anyway." "I found a file. Archived, routed through a secondary channel, tagged with a code I haven't seen in a while." A pause. "Damien, the code is Silas's." The room didn't change. The light didn't change. Damien sat very still with the phone against his ear and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What does the file say?" he asked. "It's a threat communique, professionally drafted, delivered to an unidentified recipient, female, 13 years ago." Another pause. Careful now. "It says if she doesn't disappear within 48 hours, you'll be killed. It says if she tells you about the threat, you'll be killed. It says if she contacts you again in any form." The voice stopped. "Say it," Damien said. "It says you'll die the same way your father did." The silence on the line stretched. "The same way my father did," Damien repeated. Yeah. His father had been killed in what was ruled an accident, a car, a highway, a malfunction that 3 different mechanics had signed off on. Damien had never entirely believed it, and had never been able to prove otherwise, and had spent a long time deciding it didn't matter because his father was gone either way. Apparently it mattered. Where's the file routed from? He asked. His voice was very quiet. An internal server, restricted access. A pause. Damien, it's routed from your uncle's private channel, the same channel he's been using for 20 years. This isn't speculation. The signature is his. Damien looked at the photograph of Elena on his tablet screen, the direct gaze, the thing behind her eyes that he had not had the context to read correctly until right now. She hadn't left him for another man. She had left him to save his life. And someone in his own family had made her. He stood up from the desk slowly, with the deliberate motion of a man whose hands were not entirely steady and who was not going to let that show, even alone in a room. He walked to the window and looked out at the city spread below him, all its lights in motion, the empire he had inherited and expanded and defended, the empire he had built the second half of his life around as a replacement for everything he'd lost. The empire his uncle might have handed him as compensation, as distraction, as a cage with a very large interior. Send me everything, he said. Every document, every route, every timestamp. And then? He watched the city. And then stay close, he said. This is going to move fast. He ended the call. The glass of water was still on the desk. He crossed back to it and picked it up and drank it in one long pull and set it down. His reflection in the black window glass looked back at him. A man he had been building toward for 13 years, certain and controlled and very good at damage, who had just learned that the first wound, the one everything else had grown from, had been inflicted by his own blood. He thought about his uncle's voice, the particular tone Silas had when he was managing a situation, the slight warmth that was always professional, never intimate, the warmth of a man who practiced it. He thought about Silas calling to ask about his Sunday schedule, third time this month. He thought about Elena at the nurse's station, eyes down, shoulders that involuntary shift when she heard him coming. He thought about how well she had hidden, how completely, and how she had still shown up 4 years ago in the one place she knew he might eventually walk through the door, knowing the risk, choosing it anyway for a woman who couldn't remember her own son's name. He sat back down at the desk and opened a new encrypted channel and began to write a message to the 4 people in his organization he was absolutely certain were not connected to Silas. He wrote, "We have a problem inside the house. Meet at the secondary location at 6 a.m. Come clean." Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling and let himself feel for exactly 90 seconds the full weight of what the next weeks were going to require of him. After 90 seconds, he stopped feeling it and started planning. But before he closed the file on his tablet, he looked one more time at Elena's photograph, at the direct eyes, the jaw that was set for impact. She had carried this alone for 13 years. She had paid for it with $18,000 she couldn't afford, and a life built out of erasure and the specific exhaustion of someone who had survived something by running from it for so long that running had become the life itself. He was going to find out everything, and then he was going to make it right. He didn't know yet what that meant or what it would cost. He was beginning to suspect it would cost him more than anything he had ever paid. And somewhere on the other side of the city, in a small apartment with locked doors and a habit of checking over her shoulder, Elena Rowan sat awake in the dark, because she had recognized something in Damien Viscari's eyes today that she had not seen in 13 years. The look of a man who was not going to stop. She didn't sleep. Elena had learned a long time ago that there were certain nights when sleep was simply not available to her, when her body understood before her mind did that something had shifted in the world around her and rest was no longer a reasonable option. She lay in the dark of her apartment with her eyes open and the ceiling above her doing nothing useful, and listened to the building settle around her, its pipes and joists and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. Damien had found her. She had known it would happen eventually. She had told herself 4 years ago when she took the position at Westbrook that she was prepared for it, that she had thought through every version of this moment and had a plan for each one. Walk out, transfer, disappear again. She had done it before. She could do it again. She had believed that right up until the moment he walked through the door of Margaret's room, and she looked at him and understood that 13 years had not made this smaller. It had made it larger. It had given it mass and history and the particular weight of things that have been carried wrong for too long. She got up at 4:30 because lying down was no longer accomplishing anything. She made coffee and stood at her kitchen window and watched the city begin its slow crawl toward morning. The streets were wet from earlier rain. The streetlights made long orange reflections on the pavement. She wrapped both hands around the mug and stood there until the coffee was gone, and then she set the mug in the sink and went to the closet in her bedroom and pulled down a box from the top shelf. It was not a large box. Brown cardboard sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. She had moved it with her 3 times without opening it. She set it on the bed and looked at it for a long moment and then cut the tape with a kitchen knife and opened it. Inside, a photograph, a folded letter, and a prepaid phone she had never used. She picked up the photograph first. 2 people, mid-laugh, caught off guard by the camera at what looked like a rooftop somewhere with the city behind them. She was 22 in this photograph. He was 24. She had forgotten, in 13 years of managing the memory of him, how young they had both been, how completely undefended. She set it down. The letter was 3 paragraphs, typed, unsigned. She had memorized it within hours of receiving it and had never needed to reread it. She read it now anyway. The language was clean and formal and utterly specific about what would happen to Damien if she remained. Specific in the way that people are specific when they want you to understand they are not making a general threat, but describing a plan. The prepaid phone she had bought the day she received the letter. She had intended to call him. She had stood outside a gas station at 2 in the morning with the phone in her hand and thought through what she would say. And then she had thought through what would happen to him after she said it. And she had put the phone in her pocket and taken a cab to the bus station and left. She set the phone on the bed beside the photograph and the letter and sat down next to all 3 of them and allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to simply feel how tired she was. Not tired from the double shifts, though those were real. Tired from the management of it. Tired from the daily work of maintaining the architecture of a life built around a single terrible decision and never being able to put the weight down. Her phone, her real phone, the current one, buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "I know you're awake," Damien said. She closed her eyes. "How did you get this number?" "The same way I get most things." A pause. "I need to see you." "No." "Elena?" "It's 4:30 in the morning, Damien." "I know what time it is." His voice was controlled, but something was running underneath it, a current she could feel even through the phone, something tightly held. "I found something tonight. I need to ask you about it directly." Her hands tightened on the phone. "What did you find?" "Not over the phone." "Then it waits." It doesn't wait. The current under his voice surfaced for a moment, not loud, just present, like heat through a floorboard. "Please." The please was the wrong word. It was wrong because Damien Viscari did not say please easily, and she knew it, and hearing it now at 4:30 in the morning meant he had found something significant enough to move him past where he normally operated, and that scared her more than his anger would have. "Where?" she said. "Buzz." He named a diner 3 blocks from her apartment. She didn't ask how he knew where she lived because asking would require pretending she didn't already know the answer. She put on jeans and a gray sweater and pulled her hair back and did not look at herself in the mirror for longer than it took to confirm she was presentable. She put the box back in the closet without the letter. The letter she folded and put in the pocket of her jacket. The photograph she left on the bed because she didn't know why she would bring it and didn't examine the question. The diner was the kind of place that stayed open all night for people who needed it to. Counter seats, booths with cracked vinyl, a cook visible through the pass-through who didn't look up. Damien was in the back booth, hands around a coffee cup, wearing the same coat he'd had on at the nursing home. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He looked like a man who had been sitting with something for several hours and had not gotten any more comfortable with it. He stood slightly when she came in. An automatic thing, she thought, something from a version of him that predated the Empire. She slid into the booth across from him. A waitress appeared and she ordered coffee without looking at the menu, and the waitress left, and they were alone in the back of a diner at 4:45 in the morning with 13 years between them on a Formica table. "Talk," she said. He looked at her. "Silas sent you a letter." The word letter hit her sternum like a flat hand. Her face did not change. She was very good by now, at faces not changing. 13 years ago, Damien said. A threat, typed, specific. His eyes were on hers. It said if you didn't disappear, I'd be killed. It said if you told me about it, I'd be killed. He paused. It mentioned my father. The waitress came back with coffee. Elena wrapped her hands around the cup and waited until the waitress moved away. How did you find it? She asked. An archived channel, Silas's signature. He leaned forward slightly. Elena, I need you to tell me if I'm right. She reached into her pocket and put the letter on the table between them. He looked at it. He didn't touch it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something that confirms a thing you were hoping might still be wrong. Then he picked it up and unfolded it and read it, and she watched his face while he did. Damien had a face that had been trained, she understood, over many years to give very little away. But she had known him before the training. She remembered what his face looked like when it was undefended, and she could still read the version of it that existed underneath the control, the way his jaw moved, the slight shift around his eyes, the thing he did with his breathing when something hit him harder than he'd prepared for. He set the letter down. He smoothed it flat with 2 fingers and then sat back. You kept this, he said. Yes. For 13 years. Yes. Why? She looked at her coffee. I don't know. Insurance, maybe. In the beginning. She paused. And then just because I had it. It was proof that something happened. That it wasn't... She stopped. That it wasn't what? He said. That it wasn't nothing, she said. That I had a reason. The diner was quiet around them. The cook turned something on the grill, and the smell of it drifted through. Outside, a car went past with its music too loud for the hour, and then was gone. You got in that car, Damien said. Outside the Meridian garage. A man I didn't know. A cab, she said. It was a cab. I had called it from inside because I knew if I saw you, I wouldn't... She stopped again. Started again. I couldn't say goodbye to you. I knew I couldn't do it if I saw your face, so I didn't look back. She met his eyes. I have thought about not looking back every single day for 13 years. Something moved across Damien's face that was not anger and not grief exactly. More like the recognition of a specific dimension of damage, the moment when you understand that something was done to you at a depth you had not fully measured. He told me what he was going to do, Damien said quietly. My father. 2 weeks before he died. He told me he was planning to restructure the organization, reduce Silas's role, pull back from certain operations Silas had built. He looked at the letter. My father died 3 weeks after you left. She had known this. She had followed the news from a distance, from a different city, with the sick, specific horror of someone who is watching consequences ripple outward from a stone they threw themselves, even though they hadn't thrown it, hadn't chosen it, had only received it, and reacted to it in the only way that felt survivable. The car accident, she said, was not an accident. He said it flatly. I've suspected it for years and could never prove it. Now I think I know why proof was difficult to find. He paused. Because the person I would have turned to for help finding it was the person who arranged it. The silence between them held a different quality now. Not the silence of distance, but the silence of 2 people standing inside the same ruin, looking at the walls. He separated us first, Elena said. It was not a question. She was thinking out loud. He removed me. Made sure you believed... She stopped. Made sure you had a reason to be angry instead of devastated. And then my father restructured, Damien said. And then my father died. And then I was 22 years old and furious at the world, and Silas was there to manage the transition. He picked up his coffee cup, registered it was empty, set it down. He built me. He handed me an empire, and he stood close enough to whisper in my ear for 15 years, and I let him because I thought he was the only family I had left. Damien, don't. The word came out with a controlled sharpness, not at her. She understood that. The angle of it was wrong for her to be the target. He was cutting himself off from something, from the full shape of what he was sitting with. I need to think through this clearly. I can't... He pressed 2 fingers briefly against his mouth. I cannot be what I feel right now and also be functional, and I need to be functional. She understood that. She had spent 13 years being functional at the expense of everything else. What are you going to do? She asked. I have people looking at the archives. Everything Silas ran, every channel, every transaction. His eyes came back to her. When we have enough, it's over for him. And if he finds out you're looking before you have enough? Damien's expression gave her the answer before his words did. That's the problem, he said. He's been asking about my Sunday schedule. He knows I've been going somewhere. He doesn't know where yet. Elena sat very still. He doesn't know about my mother, Damien said. That location has been protected for 4 years. But if he starts pulling the right threads, he stopped. You need to be careful. I need to leave, she said. I need to transfer out of Westbrook and no. The word was immediate and firm. If you disappear now, he'll know I found something. The facility, my mother, all of it becomes a thread he can pull. He looked at her steadily. I need you to stay. You need me to stay, she repeated. For a short time. A week. Maybe 2. Damien, if he figures out who I am, he won't. You can't promise that. No, he said. I can't. He held her gaze. I know what I'm asking. She looked at him across the formica table in the dead-hour quiet of a diner and thought about a letter that had rearranged the rest of her life, and about Margaret's thin hand patting hers, and about the way she had checked over her shoulder at every doorway for 13 years, and about the prepaid phone she had never used, and about 2 people on a rooftop mid-laugh before they understood what the world was going to cost them. 2 weeks, she said. He nodded, and then I'm done. Whatever happens after, I'm out. After 2 weeks, he said, I'll make sure you're out. She didn't know if she believed him. She wasn't certain he believed himself. But she picked up her coffee and drank it, and they sat in the back booth of that diner as the city moved from dark to gray outside the windows. And neither of them tried to fill the space between them with words that would not have been adequate anyway. The 6 a.m. meeting happened in the basement of a building Damien owned under 3 layers of corporate distance, a place that had no visible connection to the Viscari name, and which only 4 people knew how to find. Marcus was there. Beside him, a woman named Corinne Ash, who ran Damien's intelligence infrastructure with the cold efficiency of someone who had made a second career out of not being noticed. Across from her, 2 captains, brothers named Pete and Santo Delgado, who had been with Damien's father before they were with Damien, and whose loyalty he had tested carefully over many years. He laid out what he had. Not everything, he did not tell them about Elena yet, but the architecture of it. The archived file. Silas's signature. The timeline connecting the threat letter to his father's death. The restructuring his father had been planning. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Pete Delgado, who was 53 and had a face like old concrete, said, You're sure about the signature? Confirmed independently, Damien said. Silas has been inside the organization longer than some of us have been alive, Pete said. I know. He has his own people. I know. If this gets out before you've moved, I know, Pete. Damien looked at him steadily. That's why we're in this room. Pete looked at his brother. Santo was younger by 6 years and quieter, which did not mean less dangerous. Santo said nothing. He turned his coffee cup on the table in a slow circle and looked at it. Corinne Ash said, The financial architecture alone will take 2 weeks to map, possibly 3. Silas has been running parallel books for years. I've always known the numbers didn't fully reconcile, but I assumed it was his management style. She paused. It wasn't his management style. How much? Damien asked. Skimming across 15 years? Conservative estimate. She let out a short breath. 8 figures, maybe more. He's been feeding money sideways for a long time, Damien. He's been building something. Building what? That's what I need the time to find out. Damien nodded. You have 2 weeks. I'll need access to his secondary servers. Marcus will handle that. Marcus said, There's another issue. He set his phone on the table with a message visible on the screen. Silas requested a dinner with you, tonight. He's never requested dinner before. He's always waited to be invited. The room took that in. He knows something has moved, Santo said. It was the first thing he'd said. Maybe not what, but something. Damien looked at the message on Marcus's phone. Then he said, "Tell him yes." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You want to sit across from him?" "I've been sitting across from him for 15 years, Damien said. "The difference is now I know what I'm looking at." The restaurant Silas chose was good, tasteful, quiet, the kind of place where powerful men discussed things they didn't want recorded, and the staff had been trained to hear nothing. Damien arrived first, which was intentional, and was seated in a booth where he could see both entrances before Silas walked through the door. Silas Viscari was 61 and had aged with the particular authority of men who have always had resources. Silver hair, kept short, a suit that had cost what most people made in a month. He walked through the restaurant with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never had a reason to hurry, which was either genuine or the best performance Damien had ever seen, and after today he was no longer certain which. He sat across from Damien and picked up the menu and said, without looking up, "You look tired." "Long week," Damien said. "You should take more rest. Your father never rested enough either." Silas set the menu down. "It's a family tendency." Damien looked at his uncle's face. The particular shape of it, the spacing of the eyes, the controlled warmth he had always attributed to temperament, and felt a cold and very clear emotion that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. "You've been asking about my Sunday schedule," he said. Silas smiled, a small contained thing. "You disappear every third Sunday. Your security team has standing instructions not to follow. It's been 4 years. He unfolded his napkin. "I'm your uncle, Damien. Not an enemy. I worry." "Do you?" "Of course." Silas looked up. Something in his eyes was reading the room, reading Damien, with a precision that had nothing relaxed about it, no matter how relaxed his posture was. Is something wrong? Should something be wrong? That's not an answer. "No," Damien said. "It isn't." He picked up his wine glass, held it without drinking. "Tell me something, Silas. When my father was planning to restructure in the last months before he died, did he discuss it with you?" The silence lasted 1 second, maybe less. Then Silas said smoothly, "He discussed everything with me. We were brothers. He was planning to reduce your operational role. He had thoughts about reorganization, yes. We disagreed. Brothers disagree." Silas's voice was perfectly even. "What is this about, Damien?" "Nothing specific." Damien set down the glass. "I've been reviewing old records, estate administration. Some of the archived documentation from that period is incomplete." "That was 15 years ago. Some records won't survive." "Some do, though," Damien said. "Interesting what survives when you look in the right places." The waiter arrived. They ordered. When the waiter left, Silas picked up his own wine glass and said, "You seem distracted tonight." "I'm always thinking," Damien said. "Yes." Silas looked at him over the rim of the glass. "You always were, even as a boy." He set the glass down. "Your father had that quality too, always thinking, always turning things over. It made him very effective, and it also made him," he paused, choosing, "vulnerable to certain conclusions." "What kind of conclusions?" "Premature ones." Silas's eyes were steady. "The kind a man reaches when he has partial information and mistakes it for the full picture." Damien looked at his uncle and understood, with the particular clarity that comes at very specific moments, that the man across from him had just issued a warning. Not a threat, not yet. A warning, the kind extended to someone who is still considered manageable. "I appreciate the concern," Damien said. Silas nodded. "Family," he said simply. They ate. They talked about the organization's eastern expansion, about a captain who was causing problems in Baltimore, about a legitimate real estate acquisition that Corinne had been managing. They talked the way they always talked, with the surface-level ease of two men who had shared a table many times. And beneath that surface, Damien felt his uncle reading him with every word, every pause, every look, calibrating and adjusting and deciding. When the dinner ended and they stood outside on the sidewalk in the cold, Silas put a hand briefly on Damien's shoulder, the familiar gesture of it, paternal, practiced. "Get some rest," Silas said. "I will." Damien said. He watched his uncle walk to his car. He stood on the sidewalk until the car was gone. Then he took his phone out and called Corinne. He knows something is moving, Damien said. He doesn't know what yet, but he's not far behind. How quickly can you get me something usable? I need more time than 2 weeks now, Corinne said. I'm finding things, Damien. It's bigger than we thought, much bigger. The restructuring your father was planning, Silas didn't just oppose it. He had been undermining it for 2 years before your father even announced it. There are payments, contracts, witness tampering. She stopped. There is a video file in the secondary archive, old security footage from the family compound. I haven't watched it yet, but the timestamp is from 3 days before your father died, and I think, her voice was careful, I think you need to see it before anyone else does. Damien stood on the sidewalk in the cold with the city moving around him and said, Send it. You're sure? Send it. He stood there in the cold and waited. The file arrived on his encrypted tablet 2 minutes later. He opened it. Security footage, interior, timestamp 14 years and 11 months ago. His father's study. 2 figures in frame, partially obscured by the angle of the old camera. His father's voice, muffled but audible. I've already made the decision, Silas. It's done. And then his uncle's voice, very quiet, very even. Then I'm sorry, Richard. I truly am. The footage cut. Damien stared at the screen. He had suspected. He had been building toward certainty. But there is a distance between suspecting a thing and standing in the cold with your father's voice in your ears saying it's done. While your uncle says, I'm sorry, like a man apologizing for something that has already been set in motion, and no amount of preparation closes that distance cleanly. His phone buzzed. Marcus. A text with no preamble. Silas just called an emergency meeting of his captains. Tonight. Didn't go through your channels. Went around you. And then 10 seconds later, another text. Elena Rowan's apartment. Someone went through it. Her neighbor called the building manager. Place was tossed. Drawers, closet, the works. She wasn't home, but Damien, he's already looking for her. He called her before Marcus finished the second text. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either, which meant some part of her had already known this was coming. Get out of your apartment, he said. Right now. Don't go back for anything. Just walk out the front door and keep walking east on Callard Street, and I'll have someone to you in 4 minutes. A pause. Not long. How bad? Someone went through your place. They're looking for you. He heard her breath change. Not panic, something more controlled than that. The sound of a person who has survived on readiness for so long that even fear gets organized before it surfaces. He heard movement, a door, her footsteps on what sounded like stairs. I'm out, she said. Keep moving. Don't stop for lights. Don't look behind you. I know how to do this, she said quietly. He knew she did. That was the part that hit him wrong, the fact that she knew, that she had learned it, that the specific competence in her voice right now was something his uncle had made necessary 13 years ago, and she had simply adapted to it and carried it and made it part of herself the way people absorb the things they have no choice about. 4 minutes, he said. Gray car. Marcus. Okay. He ended the call and stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and looked at his phone and then at the street and then at the city around him with the specific focus of a man who is rearranging every piece on the board simultaneously. Silas had moved faster than he'd expected, which meant one of 2 things. Either Silas had better intelligence than Damien had accounted for, or someone in Damien's circle had talked. Neither option was comfortable. He called Corinne. Lock everything down. Your servers, your access points, everything you've been pulling on Silas. Air gap it now. Don't run anything through the main network. Already moving, she said. Damien, I've been going through the secondary archive and there's something else, a name I didn't expect. Tell me. Not over this line. She paused. In person. And soon. He didn't like the quality of her voice. Corinne Ash did not rattle easily. She was one of the steadiest people he employed, and what he was hearing was not exactly rattle, but something adjacent to it. The sound of someone who has found a thing that is larger than what they went looking for. 2 hour, he said. Secondary location. He put the phone away and walked to his car and drove. Marcus had Elena at a safe house by the time Damien arrived, a clean apartment on the 14th floor of a building on the north side that appeared in no organizational records and was registered to a shell entity Damien had established years ago for contingencies exactly like this one. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water she hadn't touched, still in her jacket. She looked up when he came in. She did not look frightened. She looked like someone who was being very deliberate about not looking frightened, which was different. "Did you see anyone?" he asked. "No." "The neighbor who called it in?" "Mrs. Faber. She's 72 and she hears everything through that wall. She would have called the moment she heard the door go." Elena turned the water glass on the table. They couldn't have been there more than an hour before she noticed. "Which means they went in after you left for the diner." He sat down across from her. "Which means they were watching your building before I called you. They were already in motion." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, "What did they take?" "We don't know yet. Marcus has someone going through." "The box," she said. "In my closet. If they found the box..." "The letter was with you." "Yes." She pressed 2 fingers briefly against her mouth. "There were other things. Nothing with names, nothing that points anywhere directly." She paused. "There was a photograph." He looked at her. "The 2 of us," she said. "From before." She met his eyes steadily. "If they found it and they don't already know who I am, it won't tell them much. But if they already know, it confirms the connection," Damien said. She nodded. He sat with that for a moment. The photograph he had not known she still had. The photograph she had kept in a box she'd moved 3 times and never opened. He put that somewhere and left it there because this was not the moment for it. "Corinne has something," he said. She's coming in. There's a name she found that she won't say over the phone." Elena looked at him. "What kind of name?" "I don't know yet." "Should I be worried about what kind of name?" He looked at her across the table. He had not lied to her in any conversation they had had since yesterday. He had operated in incomplete information, which was different, and he was not going to start now. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But Corinne doesn't rattle, and she was close to it on the phone." Elena absorbed this with the stillness of someone accustomed to absorbing bad information and continuing to function. Marcus came in from the other room. "The apartment's been cleared," he said. "They took the box, whatever was in it minus the letter." He looked at Damien. "And one other thing. They pulled her employment records from the building's management office. Someone got in there before the manager locked up for the night." "They have her work address," Damien said. "Westbrook will be covered by morning," Marcus said. "If she shows up for her shift..." "She's not going in," Damien said. Elena said, "Margaret?" "We'll have other staff," Damien said. "I'll make sure she's covered. You're not going back there until this is resolved." Elena looked like she wanted to argue. She looked at the water glass instead and did not argue. Corinne Ash arrived 40 minutes later. She was a compact woman of 45 with close-cropped gray hair she'd had since she was 30, and the particular physical economy of someone who does not waste movement. She came in, looked at Elena once with a quick neutral assessment, and then looked at Damien and said, "I need to show you something, both of you." She set her laptop on the table and opened a file. Inside it, a series of documents, the kind of financial and communication records that required significant access and significant expertise to extract. "I went back further than 13 years, she said. "I started with the threat letter and worked backward, trying to find the origin point. Who drafted it? Who signed off on it? What else moved at the same time?" She pulled up a transaction record. There was a payment made around the same time the letter was delivered, routed through a shell to a private investigator. The PI's job was to locate a specific individual and provide detailed personal information, address, schedule, relationships. She looked at Elena. "The target of the investigation was you." Elena said nothing. "The PI firm was hired through a third-party contractor," Corinne continued. "I traced the contractor." She paused. "The contractor wasn't Silas." The room was quiet. Damien said, "What?" "The payment structure, the routing. It's a different hand, different methodology." Corinne turned the laptop so they could both see the screen. I know Silas's architecture. I've been inside his books for 11 years. This isn't his work. It's cleaner. The shell layers are deeper and they're structured differently, with a patience that Silas doesn't usually. She stopped. Silas was involved. The threat letter has his signature. I stand by that. But the investigation, the gathering of information on Elena that made the letter possible, that came from somewhere else first. Someone fed Silas the information. Someone pointed him at her and gave him what he needed. Damien leaned forward. Who? Corinne looked at him. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been carrying a piece of information for 2 hours and has not found a way to make it easier. The payment, she said, traces back through 4 shells. At the end of it, she tapped the screen. The originating entity is a holding company called Meridian Collective, registered in Delaware, dormant for 11 years. She paused. Damien, Meridian Collective was incorporated by your father. The silence in the room was total. My father, Damien said. The incorporation documents are his signature, his attorney of record at the time. Corinne's voice was careful. I don't know what it means yet. It could mean the company was used without his knowledge. Companies get hijacked from estates. It's not uncommon. It could mean... She stopped. It could mean my father knew about the threat, Damien said. I don't know that. I want to be clear. I don't know that. Damien sat back. He sat back and looked at the ceiling, and then at the table, and then at nothing in particular, and Elena watched him with the careful attention of someone trying to gauge how deep a thing has gone. Richard Vescari, Elena said quietly. She said it like she was testing the name against something. You met him, Damien said. It was not a question. Once, at the graduation, your mother's nursing home fundraiser, you introduced us. She paused. He was very careful with me. I thought at the time it was just how he was. He was always careful, Damien said. With everything. Damien. Corinne's voice was gentle in the way it only was when the news was the worst kind. There's more. He looked at her. She pulled up another document. I found a secondary communication, not the threat letter, something earlier. A memo, internal. Your father's handwriting, scanned into the archive sometime in the last year of his life. It's addressed to Silas. She turned the laptop again. Damien read it. It was short. 8 lines. It said, The girl is a liability. The situation with Damien is becoming untenable. We cannot have him compromised by an attachment to someone outside the structure. You know what's coming. You know what he'll need to become. Handle it cleanly. Nothing that traces. Nothing that leaves him with a reason to look. Damien read it twice. Then he closed his eyes for 3 seconds and opened them. Elena was reading it. He could see her eyes moving across the lines. He watched her face while she read it, and he watched the thing that moved through her. Not surprise, exactly. More like confirmation of a fear she had carried in some unexamined part of herself for 13 years and had never let herself fully look at. She pushed the laptop back toward Corinne. Her hands were steady. This was the thing about Elena. She was steady in the places where steadiness was hardest, in the places where most people's hands would not cooperate. He ordered it, she said. Damien said nothing. Your father ordered it, she said, and Silas carried it out. She paused. And then your father was going to restructure the organization, and Silas... She stopped. Silas decided he was no longer useful, Damien said. His voice was flat and very even and had nothing underneath it that was accessible from the outside. He used my father's company to fund the investigation, used my father's directive to justify the threat. And then when my father wanted to pull back, Silas removed him and stepped in. He paused. He was going to do it anyway. The directive gave him cover. Elena looked at him. Damien, my father sent you that letter, he said. Not loudly, not with any particular emphasis, just a statement of fact placed on the table. Not directly, but he is the reason you spent 13 years. He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth the same way she had earlier, a gesture he was not aware of mirroring. He built a cage for me and put you outside it and told Silas to make sure the door stayed locked. The room held the weight of that. Marcus, who had been standing near the door, said very quietly, "I'll give you a minute," and stepped out. Corinne closed her laptop and followed him. Damien and Elena sat alone in the kitchen of a safe house at 2 a.m. with the truth between them, which was not a clean truth, which was not the truth either of them had been building toward. Not simply Silas as the villain, not simply the uncle's treachery as the source of everything. The source was older than that and more personal and more painful, and it was sitting in the room with them now and was not going to become smaller. "He loved you," Elena said. Damien looked at her. "Your father, he thought, whatever he thought. It came from believing he was protecting you." She said it without gentleness, without softening it, because she understood he didn't need it softened. She said it as a fact she had arrived at by working through the evidence. That doesn't make it doesn't change what it cost. But he wasn't trying to hurt you. He was trying to control what I became, Damien said. "Yes. And what I became," he said, "is the thing he built the cage to produce." She didn't answer that. There was no answer that wasn't also a wound. He stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood there, looking out at the city below, his back to her. She watched the line of his shoulders. The particular quality of stillness in a man who is holding something in that is very large and very heavy and has no adequate container. "The video," he said. "From the compound. My father's study. 3 days before he died. Silas saying, 'I'm sorry.'" Yes. He knew what was coming. My father knew what he'd started. He was trying to put it back. The restructuring was him trying to pull back from what he'd set in motion. He turned. His face was controlled and exhausted and very old in this light. "He told Silas to remove you, and then Silas decided that wasn't enough and removed him instead. And I have been running an empire for 15 years that was built on both of their decisions, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I built it. I thought it was mine." "It is yours," she said. "What you did with it?" "What I did with it," he said, "was become exactly what they needed me to be. Angry enough not to look backward. Powerful enough to maintain what they built, and isolated enough," he looked at her, "that there was no one close enough to make me question any of it." The silence held. Then his phone went off. Not a call. An alarm he had set on the encrypted system. A trigger that fired when specific keywords appeared in monitored communications. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. "What?" Elena said. He turned the phone so she could see the alert. It was a communication flagged from Silas's network, intercepted by Corinne's passive monitoring systems. 3 words in the body of the message, sent to an address Damien didn't recognize. "Find the nurse." And below it, sent 4 minutes later to a different address, a second message, "Westbrook Care. Patient Vescari, M. Pull the file. Find the connection." Elena stood up. "He's going after Margaret," she said. "Not Margaret," Damien said. He was already moving, already dialing Marcus. "He's using Margaret to find you. Silas doesn't know yet that you and I have connected. He thinks you're a loose thread, someone who might have documentation, someone who might be able to talk." He put the phone to his ear. "If he pulls Margaret's file, he finds 4 years of your work. He finds the payment records. He finds your name, the name you're using, and he connects it." He paused as Marcus picked up. "Marcus. Westbrook. Now. We need to pull Margaret's file before Silas's people get there, and I need a full security detail on the building within the hour." Marcus said something. Damien listened. His face went very still. He lowered the phone. "What?" Elena said. It was not a question. The flatness of her voice said she already knew it was bad. "Silas's people are already there," Damien said. "They went in 20 minutes ago. Someone on the overnight staff let them in." He looked at her. "They have Margaret's full file, and they have the name you've been working under for 4 years." The room felt smaller. "So he knows who I am," Elena said. "He will within the hour, as soon as someone runs the name." Damien set the phone on the table. "We're out of time." "Then move on Silas now," Elena said. "Don't wait for Corinne to finish. We don't have enough," he said. "The video is suggestive. The financial records are incomplete. The threat letter implicates him, but a good attorney dismantles it in an afternoon. If I move now, I expose everything we have and he walks, and then he has a reason to be aggressive instead of cautious. He looked at her. I need the full picture. I need something irrefutable, something he cannot explain and cannot bury. And if he finds me before you have it? He looked at her. He had no answer that was also honest. She nodded. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, with the steadiness of someone who has run out of the luxury of falling apart. All right, she said, then we find it faster. She sat back down. What haven't we looked at? The compound, he said. The original security system. The server that recorded that footage of my father and Silas. There were multiple cameras. If there are other recordings from that period, things Silas didn't know were captured. Are those servers still running? The compound has been closed for 8 years, but the systems were maintained on a separate power supply. I never had them decommissioned. He paused. I never had them decommissioned because I could never bring myself to go back there and do it in person, and I was too careful to send anyone else. So they're intact. If no one else has gotten there first. He was already thinking through the logistics of it. The compound was 2 hours north, accessible by one road, known to the organization and therefore potentially known to Silas. His phone buzzed again. Marcus. He answered. Marcus said, Damien, we have a problem. His voice had a quality to it that Damien had heard perhaps twice in 9 years, the quality of someone delivering news that is beyond what the normal vocabulary for bad news covers. Pete Delgado just called Silas. Damien stood very still. Pete called him after our 6 a.m. meeting, Marcus said. I just got the intercept. He told Silas you were pulling archives. He told Silas about Corinne's access. A pause. He's been Silas's man for years, Damien, longer than he's been yours. Pete Delgado. 53, face like old concrete, 22 years inside the organization. A man who had been with his father before he was with Damien. A man he had trusted past a threshold he did not extend to most people. Santos, Damien said. Clean, as far as I can tell. Pete didn't loop him in. Santos trying to reach you now. He's figured out what his brother did. Damien looked at Elena. She was watching him with those steady dark eyes, reading the situation from his face with the accuracy of someone who had learned to read danger in very small signals. Silas knows everything we've been doing, Damien said quietly. Every step we've taken in the last 24 hours. Yes, Marcus said. Does he know about Elena? Does he know she's with me right now? A pause. I don't know. Pete knew we were looking for a woman connected to your mother's care. He may not have known she was already with you. Damien looked around the room. The safe house had been established before Pete Delgado was ever in the inner circle. The address was not in any system Pete had access to, but Silas had resources beyond what Pete could provide, and he had had 24 hours of warning, and he was not a man who wasted warnings. We need to move, Damien said. Now, not in an hour. The compound? Marcus asked. The compound. He looked at Elena. Can you drive? Yes, she said. She was already standing, already pulling her jacket. Marcus, I need Santo. Just Santo. No one else from the organization. Meet us at the north gate of Harwick compound at 0400. He paused. And Marcus. Come armed. He ended the call. Elena was looking at him with the specific expression of someone doing rapid calculations, risk, route, probability. If Silas knows we're going to the compound, he might. Damien moved to the closet, pulled out a go bag he kept at every safe house, checked its contents with practiced efficiency. The compound is the last piece. If those servers have what I think they have, it ends Silas completely, not just inside the organization, but legally. Evidence that can be handed to federal investigators. Something that removes him permanently. He looked at her. If we don't go, we spend the next weeks or months running. He has more resources than we can outmaneuver indefinitely. And if we go and he's already there, Damien picked up the bag. Then we deal with that when we get there. Elena looked at him. Then she said, Your father built this. Silas burned it down from inside. And you've been running the ruins for 15 years thinking they were a palace. She said it without cruelty, just with the directness of someone saying a true thing that needs to be said before the moment closes. When this is over, whatever's on those servers, whatever happens at the compound, you know it all has to come down. He met her eyes. I know, he said. The whole structure. I know, Elena. She nodded once. Something in her face settled. Not peace, not yet, but a decision made and made cleanly. She moved to the door. He followed her. They went down the stairwell together, footsteps echoing off concrete, the building around them indifferent to the specific weight of what they were carrying, and at the bottom of the stairs she pushed through the door and the cold outside air hit them both. And somewhere across the city, in a room Damien could not see, his uncle was looking at a name on a piece of paper and understanding that the thread he had spent 13 years keeping buried had just been pulled all the way to the surface, and the only question remaining was who would get to the end of it first. The drive north took 1 hour and 50 minutes. Damien drove. Elena sat in the passenger seat with the go bag between her feet and watched the city fall away behind them, the lights thinning, the highway opening up, the dark pressing in on both sides as they moved into the kind of landscape that had no interest in whatever was happening inside the car. She did not talk. He did not talk. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have run out of the version of events they thought they were living and have not yet found the words for the one they're actually in. He drove at a speed that was fast but not reckless, both hands on the wheel, and Elena watched his hands and thought about all the things those hands had built and defended and destroyed in the years since she'd last seen them, and then she stopped thinking about it because thinking about it served nothing at 4 a.m. on a highway with no other cars. His phone was mounted on the dash. Marcus checked in every 20 minutes. The updates were terse and all moved in the same direction. Silas had called in people from outside the organization's core, which meant contractors, which meant men who would not be recognized and would not ask questions about purpose. There were at least 6 of them confirmed, possibly more. 2 had been tracked near Westbrook before Marcus's people pushed them back. The others were unaccounted for. Unaccounted for meant somewhere between them and the compound. He's going there, Elena said. She said it at the 90-minute mark, looking at nothing in particular through the windshield. Yes, Damien said. He knows what's on those servers. He must. A pause. He thought the compound was enough of a burial. No one's been there in 8 years. No reason to go, no reason to pull anything from the system. He kept his eyes on the road. He was right up until yesterday. What changed yesterday? He glanced at her. I found you, he said simply. She looked at him. He looked back at the road. The compound came into view at 3:47 a.m. Not the building first, but the gate, visible from the road. A black iron structure set into a stone wall, overgrown now with 8 years of unchecked vegetation pressing in from both sides. The access road was gravel, and the car made noise on it that seemed very loud in the surrounding silence. Damien killed the headlights 200 meters out and rolled the rest of the way using memory and what ambient light existed, which was not much. Marcus was already there. Santo Delgado was with him, standing by Marcus's car with his hands visible and his face arranged into the specific expression of a man who is managing significant guilt by converting it into purpose. He was 47 and leaner than his brother and had eyes that took in the environment in small, constant sweeps without appearing to do so. He looked at Damien when Damien got out of the car. I didn't know, Santo said. I know, Damien said. If I had known what Pete was, Santo, Damien looked at him. I need you functional, not sorry. Can you be functional? Santo's jaw tightened. Yes. Then we go in. The gate lock was electronic, running on the compound's independent power system. A system Damien had maintained through an automated contract he had never canceled because canceling it would have required making a decision about the compound, and for 8 years he had not been ready to make that decision. He entered the code from memory. The gate opened with a sound of metal that had not been used recently. They went in on foot, Damien in front, Marcus at his left shoulder, Santo covering the right flank, Elena behind them. She had not asked to stay in the car, and he had not told her to. They both understood without discussing it that the question of her safety was no longer separable from the question of his, and that the only direction available to both of them was forward. The compound had been his family's primary residence for most of his childhood. Seeing it now, in the dark, with 8 years of abandonment on it, was a particular kind of disorientation. The architecture was exactly as he remembered it, the proportions and placement unchanged, but the life had left it the way warmth leaves a room after the fire goes out, and what was left was the shape of something that used to be inhabited. The main building was a 3-story stone structure. The security server room was in the basement, a decision his father had made for temperature and protection reasons, and which now meant descending into the foundation of the place with no lights and no certainty about what was waiting for them. Marcus said very quietly, "Motion sensor on the east approach." It fired. They stopped. Damien held up one hand. They all went still. The night around the compound was not silent. Wind in the overgrown trees, something small moving in the underbrush. But underneath those sounds, if you listened with the specific attention of someone who has learned what threatening quiet sounds like, there was a quality to the air near the east wing that was different from the rest of it. A presence quality. The particular density of space occupied by people who are trying not to be detected. "How many?" Damien said, barely voiced. Marcus held up 2 fingers, then reconsidered and held up 3. Damien looked at Santo. Santo was already adjusting his angle, moving in a slow, controlled arc toward the east wall in a way that would position him behind whatever was on the other side of it. Damien put his hand on Elena's arm and moved her back 2 steps toward the cover of a stone outbuilding. The groundskeeper's structure. He remembered it from childhood. Solid walls, 1 entrance. "Stay here," he said. "Don't—" "Elena." He looked at her in the dark. "I need to know you're here. Specifically here. So I'm not also thinking about where you are." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she pressed herself against the stone wall of the outbuilding and said nothing else. He moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not elegant. It was the thing that violence actually is when it is not performed for an audience, fast and ugly, and decided by factors of positioning and surprise rather than any quality of the participants. Damien had not been a man who fought his own battles for several years, having long ago reached the level of organization where such things were delegated, but he had not forgotten how, and the body does not forget the things it learned under pressure. 3 men. Contractors, as Marcus had said, professional, equipped, but operating in unfamiliar terrain in the dark, which negated most of their advantages. Marcus took the first one before he could make noise. Santo got the second around the east corner. The third one saw Damien coming and got a shot off that went wide and hit stone, and the sound of it was enormous in the dark silence of the compound, and Damien understood, as he closed the distance and put the man down, that whatever element of surprise they had carried into this was now gone completely. He was on one knee in the gravel, breathing hard, when Marcus came back around. "More inside," Marcus said. He was not asking. "Yes," Damien said. "How many did he send?" "Enough to make sure," Damien said. He stood up. His knee hurt where it had hit the gravel. He didn't examine it. "We have to move now. The server room before anyone gets there first." They went through the main entrance. Damien had the key and used it rather than the time it would take to find another way in, and moved through the ground floor of the house in the dark. He knew the layout. He moved through it by memory, through rooms that smelled of dust and closed air, and the specific staleness of spaces not entered in years, through the kitchen where his mother had sat with coffee every morning, and the hallway where his father's study door used to stand open, and down the stairs into the basement. The server room was at the end of the basement corridor. The door was heavy, steel-reinforced, with a biometric lock that ran on the independent power system. Damien put his hand on the reader. It hesitated. 8 years of no input, and then it opened. Inside, racks of equipment, some of it outdated by current standards but maintained and functional, the cooling system running at a low, steady hum. Damien crossed to the primary terminal and woke it up. "How long?" Marcus said from the door. "To find the file Corinne identified." He was already moving through the system. 10 minutes, maybe less." "We may not have 10 minutes." "Then cover the door." Marcus covered the door. Santo was somewhere in the corridor behind him. Damien stood at the terminal and worked through the system's directory with the focused speed of a man who learned these systems when they were installed and has not forgotten their architecture, and Elena came through the door 40 seconds after he'd told her to stay outside, because of course she did. He did not say anything about it. She moved to his right and watched the screen. "The timestamp," she said. "From Corinne's file? I know." He was already there. He pulled the directory from that period, the last 3 months before his father's death, and the volume of footage that existed was significant. His father had installed a comprehensive system. Every room, every approach, continuous recording. "Silas's meeting with your father," Elena said. "That's the one Corinne found. But if there are others, if there were conversations before that one, help me filter." He stepped slightly aside and she moved in, and they worked the system together, her on the directory and him pulling files as she flagged them. And he was aware of the proximity of her, the specific way she smelled, clean and slightly cold from outside. And he put that away with everything else that was not useful right now. 3 minutes in, Santo's voice came from the corridor. "Contact. 2 men, west stairwell." Marcus said, "Holding." Damien did not look up from the screen. 4 minutes in, Elena said, "This one." She had her finger on the screen, not touching it, hovering. A file time-stamped 6 weeks before his father's death. Camera. Study, angle 2. He opened it. The footage was clearer than the clip Corinne had found. Better angle, better light. His father at the desk, which was how he had always worked, standing for the first part of a conversation, sitting when it became serious. Silas across from him. And a third figure seated in the chair by the window, partially in shadow. Damien leaned closer to the screen. He did not recognize the third figure immediately. Then the figure shifted, and the light from the desk lamp caught his face for a moment. 3 seconds. Enough. Damien knew the face. He knew it from the present, not from this footage. He knew it from organizational meetings and financial briefings, and the particular way this man held himself in rooms full of powerful people, with the slight deference of someone who has learned that appearing less dangerous is an asset. Carter Webb, the organization's primary federal liaison. A man who had spent 12 years managing the relationship between the Viscari, a sworn organization, and the investigators tasked with monitoring it. A man who had been, as far as Damien had ever understood, the most reliable piece of the organization's protection structure. On the screen, Carter Webb was listening to Damien's father describe something and nodding with the specific quality of a man confirming plans that have already been agreed upon. Elena said, "Who is that?" "Someone who was supposed to be on our side," Damien said. His phone buzzed. He almost didn't look at it. Then he did. The text was from a number he didn't recognize. 7 words. "Stop the playback. Come out. We need to talk." He looked up from the phone. From somewhere in the basement, not the corridor, the room adjacent, through the wall, a voice came. Not shouted. Conversational, the way a man talks when he is certain of his position and has no need to project anything. "Damien," Silas said. "I came myself. That should tell you something." Damien looked at Marcus in the doorway. Marcus's expression was controlled and very unhappy. "The wall behind the east rack," Damien said quietly. "There's a passage. My father put it in when the basement was renovated. He had not thought about that passage in 20 years. He knew about it." "Of course he knew." Silas's voice came again, slightly closer. "I helped design this building. I know every door in it, including the ones that aren't visible." A pause. "The footage you're looking at, I know what's on it. I know what Corinne found. I know what you've been doing for the past 24 hours, Damien, because I had 12 hours of warning and I am very good at preparation." Another pause. "Come out and talk to me. Like family." Damien looked at Elena. She looked back at him. "The file," she said, very low. "Copy it. Everything in that directory, right now." He was already doing it. A portable drive from the Go bag, inserted, transfer initiated. The progress bar was a specific kind of torture. 4%, 6, 9. "I don't want to hurt you," Silas said. The wall between them was stone, but his voice carried. "That has never been my intention. What I did, what your father and I did, we did because we needed you to be what you became. Look at what you built, Damien. Look at what you are. You think that happens if you're carrying a woman and her complications? You think you become what you became if you're soft?" 14%. He was going to ruin it, Silas said. Your father. His conscience got heavy. Men like us don't get to have consciences. You know that better than anyone. He was going to dismantle 40 years of work because he got old and sentimental. I handled it, the same way I handled everything else. A pause. The same way I'm here to handle this. 22%. Marcus moved very slightly in the doorway, a readjustment of weight, a preparation. Santo was somewhere in the corridor and had gone silent, which meant he was either in position or he was not. Damien did not know which. Carter Webb, Damien said, loud enough to carry through the wall. He watched the progress bar. He's been running interference for you with the federal investigators. Not for the organization, for you personally, covering your specific activities. 29%. That's on the footage. A silence on the other side of the wall. Carter is a practical man, Silas said finally. He understands how the world works. He understood how it worked up until about an hour ago, Damien said. When I had someone make contact with a federal investigator who has not been on Carter's list. 38%. Someone Carter doesn't know about. Someone I've been maintaining at a distance for 3 years for exactly this kind of situation. He paused. They have Corinne's financial documents. They have the threat letter. They have the video of you in my father's study, and in about 6 minutes, they're going to have everything else that's in this server. The silence on the other side was different this time. Longer. 47%. You're bluffing, Silas said. I'm not a man who bluffs, Damien said. You built me. You know that. The passage in the wall opened. It was not subtle. The section of stone moved on a mechanism, swinging inward, and Silas stepped through with 2 men behind him who had the build and bearing of people whose function was specifically physical. Silas himself was in a dark coat, unhurried, looking at Damien across the server room with an expression that was almost sorrowful, the expression of someone who has arrived at an outcome they did not prefer. 58%. Elena was between Damien and the terminal. She had not moved away from it. Silas looked at her. He looked at her with the particular attention of someone seeing an abstraction made concrete. She had been a name, a problem, a loose thread, and now she was a person in a room, and the adjustment was visible in his face. Elena Rowan, he said, or whatever you're calling yourself. He looked back at Damien. She has no idea what she's walked into. She knows exactly what she's walked into, Damien said. Does she know what it's going to cost her? Silas said. Does she know what it costs everyone who gets close to this family? Your father found out. I imagine she's been finding out incrementally for the past day or two. Don't, Elena said. Silas looked at her. Don't talk about cost to me, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady. I know the cost. I've been paying it for 13 years. You don't get to lecture me about what this family does to people who get close to it. Silas studied her for a moment. Something moved through his face that might, in another life, have been respect. You're right, he said. I apologize. He said it with complete sincerity, which was the most unsettling possible delivery. 69%. Silas looked at the terminal, at the progress bar, then back at Damien. You know I can't let that complete, he said. You can't stop it, Damien said. I have 2 men in this room and at least 4 more in the building. Silas's voice remained conversational. Marcus is good. Your Delgado boy is angry enough to be effective, but numbers are numbers. They are, Damien agreed. 78%. Silas moved his eyes to Elena. Step away from the terminal, he said. She did not move. Elena, Silas said, with the particular patience of a man who has learned to be patient with obstacles. I have a great deal of respect for what you've endured. I genuinely do. You were collateral in something that wasn't about you, and you handled it with more dignity than most people manage. But I need you to step away from that terminal. No, she said. 84%. One of Silas's men moved toward the terminal. Marcus came through the doorway fast and the room collapsed into motion. Not the organized violence of trained operatives working a plan, but the compressed chaotic violence of too many people in a small room with too much at stake. and Damien moved into it and through it with the specific ferocity of a man who has nothing left to be careful about. He was hit once, a blow to his left side that was not clean, but was hard enough to put sparks at the edge of his vision and send him into a server rack that rocked but did not fall. He got his hands on the man who'd thrown it and used the rack behind him as a fulcrum and put the man on the floor and kept him there. The room was loud, and then it was quiet. 91%. Damien straightened. His side was wrong, something structural, possibly a cracked rib, the kind of injury that announces itself clearly but allows function if you are willing to pay the price of it. He was willing. He looked around the room. Marcus was upright. Santo had come through the passage. He had found the other side of it in the corridor and had come through behind Silas's men. 2 men down. The other 2 were being managed by Marcus and Santo with the controlled efficiency of people who have finished being uncertain. Silas had not moved during any of it. He was standing exactly where he had been, coat still straight, looking at Damien with an expression that had shifted into something quieter, a man doing a final calculation. 97%. "You're going to hand all of that to federal investigators," Silas said. "Yes," Damien said, "and yourself with it. The organization, everything you've built, you hand that over. You don't walk away clean either." "I know," Damien said. Silas looked at him for a long moment. 15 years, he said. "I built you for 15 years. "You built me wrong," Damien said. 99%. The transfer completed. The small sound the drive made when it finished was inaudible under normal circumstances. In the server room at that moment, it seemed very clear. Damien pulled the drive and put it in his jacket pocket. Silas looked at the terminal. Then he closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, a gesture that was almost private, the gesture of a man acknowledging to himself that something is finished, and then he opened them and looked at Damien with the clear, flat gaze of a man who has moved past one phase into whatever comes next. "There are things on that drive," Silas said quietly, "that are not about me. There are things that will change what you believe about your father, about this family, about the decisions that were made before you were old enough to make your own." He paused. "Are you prepared for that?" "I've been looking at it for the past 12 hours, Damien said. "I'm prepared." "You think you are," Silas said. From somewhere above them, in the main building, a sound. Multiple footsteps, moving fast, coordinated. Not the remaining contractors, a different quality of movement, the kind that comes with radios and vests and the specific authority of people who have been authorized to be here. Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus said, "That's the contact you told Silas about, the federal investigator." He paused. "Except you didn't actually make that call, did you?" "No," Damien said. "I bluffed." He looked at the ceiling, at the sound of boots moving through the floor above him. "But Corinne did, an hour ago. Without telling me she was going to, because she knew I hadn't decided yet, and she made the decision for me." The footsteps reached the basement stairs. Silas looked at Damien across the server room for the last time as a free man. His face was composed and held a kind of dignity that was genuine, which made it harder to look at rather than easier, because genuine dignity in a man who has done what Silas had done is the most disorienting possible combination. "You could have been what I needed you to be," Silas said. He said it without rancor, almost regretfully. "You had everything for it." "I know," Damien said. "That's the problem." The basement door opened and the room filled with light, and voices giving instructions, and the sound of the compound that had been silent for 8 years becoming very loud all at once, and Damien stood in the middle of it with a drive in his jacket pocket and a cracked rib and Elena's hand, which had found his in the chaos and was holding it with a grip that was not gentle but was very deliberate, and he held it back with the same quality, not gentle, not yet, just present, just here, just the specific fact of her hand in his in a room where everything was ending and something else had not yet begun. And then Santo Delgado's voice came from the passage, sharp and short. "Damien, there's a man down in the corridor, and it's not one of ours. It's Carter Webb, and he's been shot, and he's talking, and you need to hear what he's saying right now because he's not going to be saying anything for much longer." Carter Webb was dying in the corridor, and he knew it. He was on his back against the stone wall with his legs extended in front of him and one hand pressed against his side where the bleeding was, and the other hand flat on the floor beside him like it was checking the temperature of the stone. He had been shot by one of Silas's contractors, a man who had apparently decided that Webb's sudden willingness to talk made him a liability of a different category than originally planned. The contractor was not a problem anymore. The problem now was the specific quality of Carter Webb's breathing, which was wet and irregular and told anyone who had ever been near a serious wound that the window for conversation was closing. Damien crouched in the corridor beside him. The federal agents were in the server room behind them and in the compound above them, and were working with the organized efficiency of people executing a prepared operation, which meant Corinne had given them more than a tip. She had given them a full briefing and likely a copy of everything on the drive before Damien had even pulled it. He would deal with that later. Right now, Carter Webb was looking up at him with eyes that were trying to stay focused and not entirely succeeding. "Who shot you?" Damien said. "One of Silas's people." Webb's voice was hoarse. I was trying to... He stopped, breathed. The sound of it was bad. "I came to make a deal. I knew it was over. I've known since Corinne started pulling the financial records 2 days ago. I have contacts everywhere, Damien. That's been my value." He paused. "Silas found out I was going to cooperate before I could make the approach." "What deal?" Damien said. "Testimony," Webb said. "Everything. Every piece of cover I've run for the organization for 12 years. Every conversation I had with Silas about your father, every arrangement. In exchange for..." He stopped again. His free hand moved slightly on the floor. "Doesn't matter now. The arrangement is not going to happen." "Tell me about my father," Damien said. Webb looked at him. A long look, the kind a man manages when he is trying to decide whether he still owes anything to anything. Then something in his face settled into a decision. "Your father did not order the threat against Elena Rowan," he said. "The memo, whatever you found in the archive, that was Silas. Silas drafted it in your father's handwriting. He had samples going back years. He did it to create documentation that would protect him if your father ever pushed back." He paused. "Your father didn't know the girl existed. He didn't know about Damien's relationship, not from any investigation Silas commissioned. He found out afterward. He found out because I told him." Damien went very still. "I told him," Webb repeated, quieter now. 6 weeks before he died. "I told him that Silas had forced a young woman out of his son's life using a forged threat letter under Richard's name. I told him because I thought..." He stopped. "I thought it would give him leverage over Silas, a reason to move against him. I was wrong about that. What it did was accelerate Silas's timeline." His hand pressed harder against his side. "Your father was trying to find her. In the last weeks of his life, he was trying to find Elena Rowan and make it right. He had one of his own people looking." Webb closed his eyes for a second. "Silas found out, and Silas made the decision." The corridor was quiet except for the sounds of the operation above them and Webb's breathing. "The meeting in the study," Damien said. "The footage. My father said it's done. Silas said I'm sorry. Your father had found Elena's location. He was going to contact her, tell her it was safe, bring her back." Webb opened his eyes. "He told Silas it was done, that he was going to fix it." A pause. Silas was apologizing for what he was about to do. He looked at Damien steadily. "Your father was not the man who hurt her. He was the man who was going to fix it and didn't get the chance." Damien sat with that. He sat with it in the corridor on his heels with his cracked rib making itself known every time he breathed, and the sounds of federal agents processing the compound around him and the image of his father's face as he remembered it. Not the constructed image of a man who had ordered Elena's removal, but the actual face, the one from memory, which was not a hard man's face, which had been, underneath everything it had learned to present to the world, the face of someone who felt things in the places where feeling things was most inconvenient. He had been wrong about his father. Not entirely. His father had built an empire that required the specific kind of moral compromise that made all of this possible, but wrong about the ending of him. Wrong about the memo. Wrong about what those last weeks had been about. He thought about what that meant, and then he put it somewhere it could be examined later when the immediate cost of examining it would not be so high. "Is there anything else?" he said. Webb looked at the ceiling. "Silas has a secondary account, offshore, funds from the organization going back 22 years. It's not in any records Corinne found because it was run through a channel your father established before Silas had access to the architecture." He said an account number. He said it clearly and then repeated it. "The access code is your father's date of birth reversed. It was your father's account. Silas took it over after the accident. He's been using it ever since." He paused. "There's enough in it to matter to a federal case." "I'll make sure it's passed on," Damien said. "I know," Webb said. "That's why I'm telling you." He did not say anything else after that. Damien stayed beside him until the medics came through with a stretcher, and then he stood up and stepped back and let them work, and watched them work with the knowledge that the work was probably not going to be enough. He was right. Carter Webb was pronounced at the hospital 2 hours later. His testimony, captured by the federal agent who had followed Damien into the corridor and had the presence of mind to record the conversation on her phone, was entered into the record and held up in every subsequent proceeding. It was, in the end, the most useful thing Carter Webb had done in 12 years of being useful to the wrong people. The debrief with the federal investigators took 4 hours and happened in a conference room in a building that had the particular institutional quality of places where serious things are decided without drama. Damien sat across from 2 investigators and a federal attorney and answered every question with the complete honesty of a man who has made a decision and is not going back from it. He gave them everything. Not just Silas, the full architecture, the organization's operations, its financial structure, its operational territories, names, accounts, evidence, locations. He gave it with the methodical thoroughness of someone who has been inside a system long enough to know where every piece of it is. The federal attorney, a woman in her 50s with the particular tiredness of someone who has seen a great deal and been surprised by very little, looked at him across the table at the end of the 4th hour and said, "You understand what you're giving up?" "Yes," Damien said. "Everything," she said. "Not as a challenge, as a clarification." "Everything," he agreed. "And in exchange you want immunity for the employees and ancillary workers, the people on the organizational edges who are not decision makers." "And one other person," he said. "Elena Rowan. She has a sealed identity that was established under circumstances of duress. I want that identity protected and her prior records expunged." He looked at the attorney steadily. "She was a victim of this organization, not a participant. I want that formally recognized." The attorney made a note. "That's manageable," she said. "And Margaret Viscari," he said. "My mother is in a care facility and has no awareness of any of this. Her care continues uninterrupted. Whatever assets are seized, her facility is not among them. Also manageable." The attorney looked at him. "And you?" He had negotiated his own terms with a separate attorney in the 2 hours between the compound and this room. The terms were not generous. He did not expect them to be. There was a period of cooperation, a monitored transition, and at the end of it a sentence that had been reduced significantly in exchange for the totality of what he was providing, but that was not nothing. He was not walking away clean. He had known, since the night in his apartment when the first stone shifted, that he was not going to walk away clean. "My terms are already filed," he said. The attorney looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who is recalibrating their model of a situation. Then she nodded once and closed her folder. "We'll be in touch," she said. Chap. He found Elena in the hallway outside the conference room. She was sitting on a bench with her elbows on her knees and her hands loosely clasped and her eyes on the middle distance, and she looked up when he came out. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable," he said. "That's not an answer." "I know." He sat down beside her on the bench. The hallway was quiet. Institutional linoleum, fluorescent light, the distant sound of a building doing its ordinary business. 3 years with good behavior and the cooperation credit. Monitored afterward. Asset forfeiture. He paused. "My terms." She was quiet for a moment. 3 years, she said. "Yes." She looked at her hands. He watched the side of her face. "Carter Webb," she said. "He told me about my father." She looked at him. He told her what Webb had said. He told her all of it. The forged memo, the investigation Webb had brought to his father's attempt in those last weeks to find her and undo what Silas had done, and what that attempt had cost. He told it plainly, without softening and without elaboration, because she had spent 13 years with a version of events that was wrong, and she was owed the correct version delivered straight. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat very still for a long moment. "He was trying to find me," she said. "Yes." "He was going to—" She stopped. Her jaw moved. "He would have told you." "Yes." She pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth. 1 second, 2. Then she lowered it. Her eyes were bright, but nothing fell. She had, he understood, used up all of her falling apart over many years in small private doses. And what was left was this: the stillness of a person who has absorbed the worst of a thing and is deciding what to do with the rest of it. "The memo wasn't real," she said. "No. All this time I thought—" She stopped again. "I thought his father had looked at me and decided I wasn't worth—" She stopped a third time, and this time did not start again. He reached over and put his hand over hers. He did not say anything. There was nothing that was adequate, and he knew it, and she knew it, and the hallway's institutional light fell on them both with complete indifference to the particular weight of the moment. After a while, she turned her hand over and held his. 3 years, she said again. Not with grief in it exactly, with the quality of someone who is measuring a distance and deciding whether it is crossable. "I'm not asking you to wait," he said. "I know you're not. I'm not asking you for anything, Elena. What I'm—" He stopped. He looked at the linoleum. "I owe you 13 years, and I cannot give them back. I cannot give them back, and I cannot fix what they cost you, and I cannot make the asking for anything now feel like anything other than another thing I'm taking." He looked at her. "So I'm not asking. I'm just here, for whatever that's worth." She looked at him for a long time. She looked at him with the kind of look that sees through the surface of a person into whatever has been built underneath. And she had always been able to do that, had always had that specific quality of attention that made being looked at by her feel like being read accurately for the first time. 3 years, she said a third time, and this time there was something different in it, something that was not quite a decision, but was the beginning of one. The proceedings against Silas Vescari took 7 months to reach a conclusion. In that time, Damien cooperated with every request made of him: testimonies, document reviews, organizational briefings, with the consistent thoroughness he had applied to everything in his life, now directed at dismantling the structure he had spent 15 years building. He did it without visible emotion and without drama, which was noted by the investigators who worked with him as the behavior of a man who had made a decision and was executing it cleanly. Silas, at trial, was a composed and dignified man who acknowledged nothing until the account number and access code that Carter Webb had provided led investigators to 22 years of financial records that Silas had no coherent explanation for. The recording from his father's study, authenticated independently and entered into evidence, removed the last available defense. He was convicted on 11 counts. The sentence was significant. He received it in the courtroom with the same composed dignity he had carried throughout, and the last image Damien had of him was his back, walking away between 2 officers, coat still straight, silver hair still kept. Damien watched him go and felt something that was not satisfaction and not relief, but was the specific emptiness that comes when you have been carrying a weight for a very long time and have finally set it down, and your body does not yet know what to do with the absence of it. Margaret Vescari did not know what had happened. This was both the hardest and the simplest fact of the period that followed. She continued her mornings in room 14 with the specific texture of a life that had contracted into its immediate sensory present. The quality of light through her window, the sound of the garden, the face of the person sitting beside her, which she could not always name but could always recognize as belonging. Elena went back to Westbrook. She went back because she chose to, not because any arrangement required it, and she told the director she was returning on a modified schedule that did not require explanation, and the director, who had watched Elena work for 4 years and understood something about the quality of it, did not ask for one. She went back because Margaret was still there, and Margaret's morning still needed a certain kind of company, and because the action of going back was the most direct way Elena knew to express something she did not yet have words for. One morning, 3 weeks after the trial concluded, Margaret held Elena's hand while they sat by the window and watched a bird work at something in the garden, and Margaret said with the particular clarity she sometimes found in the early hours, "You stayed." Elena looked at her. "Yes," she said. "He didn't deserve it," Margaret said. She said it without identifying who she meant, and Elena understood she might mean her son or her husband or the world in general, and it didn't matter which. "No," Elena said, "but I didn't do it for deserving." Margaret looked at the bird in the garden. "No," she said, "that's not usually why we do anything." She held Elena's hand for another hour and then fell asleep, and Elena sat with her hand in Margaret's and watched the garden and let the morning be what it was. Damien began serving his sentence on a Tuesday in March. He had arranged, through his attorney and through the cooperation agreement, a facility that was not punitive in the ways that would have been operationally certain without the agreement, and which had a visiting structure that was workable. Elena visited on the first available day. She drove herself. The drive was 2 hours on a highway that ran through the kind of landscape that did not comment on whatever was happening inside the car. She had been to this facility once before, the week it was arranged, to understand the layout and the protocols. She did not like the layout or the protocols. She went anyway. He was already in the room when she was shown in, seated at a table, in the clothes they provided, which were not the clothes he had spent 15 years in, and which made him look, she thought, younger, or more accurately, more like the person she had known before the 15 years. He stood when she came in, the automatic thing again. She sat down across from him. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," she said. She put her hands on the table. "I'm here." He looked at her hands, then at her face. "How is she?" "Good morning today." She asked about the roses. She always asked about the roses. Something moved through his face that was undefended and then was managed. "The garden at the compound. She planted those herself, the first year she was there." "I'll tell her you remember." He looked at her. "Elena, don't," she said gently. "Don't do the thing where you tell me what you should and shouldn't ask for. We've covered that." She looked at him steadily. "I drove 2 hours on a Tuesday because I wanted to. That's the whole of it." He held her gaze. Something in him settled, not relieved, not at rest exactly, but less braced, the posture of someone who has been holding something against an impact that has not come. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. They talked for the duration of the visiting period. They talked about Margaret and about the federal transition process, and about a book he had been reading, and about what she was planning to do with the apartment now that her sealed identity had been formally protected. They talked with the ease of people who have been through the worst version of a thing together and come out the other side still able to speak to each other, which is not a small thing. And both of them understood it was not a small thing, and neither of them said so directly, because some understandings are better maintained in the space between words than forced into the words themselves. When the time was up, she stood, and he stood, and they were on opposite sides of a table with a room around them that was not their room and a situation around them that was not their choice, but was what the choices had produced. "Next Tuesday?" he said. She picked up her jacket. "Next Tuesday," she said. She walked out. He watched her go. He sat back down at the table after the door closed and placed both his hands flat on the surface in front of him and looked at them. The hands he had built things with and broken things with, and which had held hers in a corridor at the compound, the way you hold something you are not going to let go of again, and he breathed, carefully, around the rib that had healed mostly, but not entirely, and he let the room be quiet. 3 years passed the way time passes when you are not trying to get through it, but simply living in it, not quickly and not slowly, but with the particular reality of days that accumulate into something you do not fully perceive until you are standing at a different point looking back. He walked out on a Thursday morning in early spring. The light was the particular pale gold of a morning that has not yet decided how warm it will become. Elena was in the parking lot. She had driven the same car, now 10 years old, which she had kept because it ran and because she had not been in a position that required decisions about cars. She was leaning against it with her hands in her jacket pockets when he came out. He walked toward her. She watched him come. He looked different in the ways that 3 years make a man look different, and exactly the same in the ways that 3 years cannot touch. She had come to understand in 3 years of Tuesday visits that the core of him, the thing underneath the empire, and the damage, and the 15 years of misdirected grief, was the same thing she had understood at 22, which was a man who felt things very deeply and had not, until now, known what to do with that. He stopped in front of her. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "I found a place." He looked at her. "On the coast, 2 hours from the city." She watched his face. "Small. A proper garden in the back. Someone planted things there a long time ago, and they've been growing without anyone paying attention, which means they're completely overgrown and a little wild, and I think there's something in there that might be roses." She paused. "The light in the mornings is good." He looked at her. His eyes were doing the thing she had learned to read over 3 years of Tuesdays. Not controlled, not managed, just present, just exactly where he was. "The light in the mornings," he said. "Yes." "You picked it for the light." "I picked it," she said, "for a lot of reasons." He looked at her for a moment longer, the pale gold morning, the parking lot, the specific unremarkable fact of both of them standing in it. And then he looked at his hands briefly, the same gesture she had seen in the corridor at the compound, the checking gesture, the gesture of a man verifying that something is real. Then he looked back at her. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She opened the car door. He got in. She went around and got in on her side and started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road, and the facility disappeared in the rear-view mirror, and the morning light fell through the windshield onto both of them, and neither of them looked back. The drive took 2 hours. She did not play music. He sat in the passenger seat, a thing he had almost no practice at, sitting in the passenger seat, letting someone else navigate, and watched the city fall away, and then the suburbs, and then the land opening up, the way it does when you get far enough from the things that have defined you, the way the space between things increases until you stop being able to see the individual pieces and start seeing only the whole of it, the road ahead, the light on it, and the two of you moving through it at a speed that is neither urgent nor slow, but simply forward, simply the speed of people who have somewhere to be that they have chosen for themselves, finally, after a very long time of being somewhere else. Margaret Viscari spent her last months in room 14 with the garden window and the morning light and Elena's company, and when the schedule permitted, a man who sat beside her and held her hand and answered to whatever name she called him on that particular day. She passed on a Tuesday in late autumn, quietly, in the early hours when the building was still, and the garden outside her window was beginning its winter preparation. She did not know, at the end, who the man beside her was. She held his hand and looked at the window and said, with the particular clarity she sometimes found, "You stayed." And Damien Vescari, who had spent 15 years becoming the most feared man in an empire built on violence and lies, and a grief he had mistaken for strength, sat beside his mother in the quiet room and said, "Yes," and meant it in every direction he could think of, for every version of the word that existed. The morning after, he drove back to the coast with the windows down and the cold air moving through the car, and the smell of the sea before he could see it. Elena was in the garden when he came through the gate, the overgrown one, the roses that had grown without anyone watching them, which she had been working on slowly and without urgency over many months. She had mud on her hands and on the knee of her jeans where she had knelt in the soil, and she looked up when she heard the gate. He stopped on the path. She looked at him. She had learned over the particular intimacy of the past months to read what he could not always say, and she read it now in the way he was standing, the specific quality of grief that has accepted itself, that has arrived at the place where it is simply part of the landscape of a person rather than a wound still being managed. She pulled off her gardening gloves and walked to him. She put her arms around him. He put his around her and stood there on the garden path in the cold morning air with his face against her hair, and felt the specific weight of everything settle into something he did not have a precise word for. Not peace, not happiness exactly, something older and less fragile than either of those things. Something that had been built, slowly and at enormous cost, out of the ruins of the version of both their lives that a man in a gray suit had destroyed in the name of what he believed a king required. The roses behind her were almost tamed. Not quite. She had said she was leaving some of the wildness in them because wildness in something that has survived without care for a long time is not a flaw, but a record. He thought about that. He thought about what it meant to be a record of survival rather than evidence of damage. He thought about his mother's hand in his in a quiet room and about a letter that had been carried for 13 years in a cardboard box, and about a parking garage at 24 years old, and about a drive that was supposed to happen but didn't, and about all the roads that had run in every direction from that moment, and about where they had each arrived from following the ones they had. He held her, and the morning held them both, and in the garden the overgrown roses moved slightly in the wind off the water, and the day opened ahead of them the way days do when you have finally, after everything, found the right place to stand.